Dr. Alan Moran, who's the Principal of Regulation Economics, joining us from Melbourne. Again, thanks for joining us, Alan. I want to first get your thoughts on this bid by Mike Cannon-Brookes of Atlassian fame. I mean, he's not famed for being active in the energy sector. He has been a bit of a climate activist, at least publicly. What do you make of his bid to try and take over AGL, a failed bid as it stands now?
Well, it's quite bizarre in the sense that predators normally look at firms with kind of lazy or underperforming assets with a view of turning them around and making them profitable. But he basically wants to take over AGL to actually close its assets and expedite the process that is being forced upon the company by the renewable subsidies which are in place. Essentially, the renewables force these baseload power stations to kind of operate intermittently, to operate only when the renewables can't operate. So basically, it increases the cost, the cost per megawatt hour, because if you've got fewer megawatt hours to spread your overheads over. Probably increases the cost by about 20 or 30%, and is forcing these closures, which the present takeover bid seeks to expedite.
Yeah, look, it's a hard one to get your head around because AGL is already trying to do that itself. It's trying to get rid of the cost of running these coal-fired power stations as soon as possible because it wants to maximise its return to shareholders, of course. The issue is, though, what about reliability of supply? And who is actually in there protecting reliability of supply? The providers don't do that. They're not interested in that. They're interested in making a dollar. Can we trust AEMO and the other government authorities to make sure we have enough supply in 5, 10, 15 years' time?
Well, I think the answer is no. AEMO and the other authorities are going on a wing and a prayer that in 5 or 10 or 15 years' time, the renewables will have been so improved and other gadgets on the lines will be so able to ensure that predictability and reliability that we needn't worry about it. But essentially, the renewables cost something like twice as much as coal, for example, that they're replacing, and also they then basically need to have this firming, which is not possible when it's intermittent because it goes on and off with the vagaries of the weather and the daylight changes. Whereas, of course, the baseload power stations, you mentioned nuclear before, but coal as well, can carry on operating automatically all the time, but can't do so profitably when you have subsidised competitors in there, forcing them to operate below par and actually forcing them to operate in ways that they're not designed to operate, that is in the stop-start fashion, which causes damage to the generators themselves.
Well, it's important, I think, for us all to remember, of course, that if you didn't have these climate policies, if you didn't have subsidies and quotas for renewables, of course, all those coal-fired generators would be operating very effectively, very profitably, and would have cheap, abundant electricity. I mean, the fact that they're being forced out of existence is exactly what the climate policies are designed to do. They're designed to drive them out of business. So I think it's weird when governments complain about it, because governments actually have policies that are designed to do this. But what I want to get your thoughts on is a little bit of what Mike Cannon-Brookes had to say, because he's one of those climate evangelists who seems to think that this thing is just like a magic pudding, that renewables are going to be the answer to life, the universe and everything. Have a listen.
I've long said that decarbonisation is the greatest economic opportunity facing Australia, but it requires vision and action, right? And what Grok, along with Brookfield, are doing to purchase 100% of AGL in our offer is to take that action, right? We strongly believe it will result in lower bills for consumers. We can fund this transition ourselves, and we can build out the replacement capacity, which is what the government wants to happen. We'll create far more jobs in doing the transition inside the combined entity. And obviously, the emissions is far lower, right?
Well, I don't know, Alan, it's the easiest thing in the world to make money out of renewables because the government subsidises it and mandates it. So if you're a millionaire, why wouldn't you put money into renewables? And it's easy to produce cheap electricity too, but can you produce it when we need it? And this is a breakthrough that nobody's delivered. Are we leading a global experiment here in Australia?
Well, if it's successful, we certainly are, but it's very unlikely to be successful. Renewables are just more expensive. They're more diffuse in terms of their energy. They have to be transported more expensively in terms of transmission lines. They cannot work. They can actually create more jobs, I suppose, insofar as if they become labour intensive. But that's like saying, you know, you could plant trees, dig them up, plant trees, dig them up, plant trees, dig them up. That creates jobs, but it's not any productive jobs, and it's no way to build an economy. At the present time, the renewables are increasing the costs of our electricity quite substantially. Karen Brooks, I think, seems to think that they're going to be cheaper. Well, if they're cheaper, then don't do anything, because then they will displace coal, nuclear, and anything else. But they won't
just
do
let me stop you on that point,
because they are intrinsically.
Yeah, it's such a cut-through point. I mean, if renewables are so easy and so reliable and so cheap, then there's no government policy required. Nothing's required. You know, they'll just build out with renewable, cheap, reliable energy. We know that. But, of course, it's not the case. They all want more government assistance. And you mentioned prices. We know electricity prices have come down a bit over the past year or so, but they came down from incredible peaks driven by climate policies. I just want to have a look at a graph that you've forwarded to us here that shows what's happened to prices. And you can see here with your black arrow there points to the start of the national electricity market. And then the green arrow is where we see the build out of renewable energy, of unreliable energy. And guess what happens during that period? Prices go up. Are you surprised?
Mm-hmm. Not at all. I think that's inevitable. It's going to happen. The more renewables we have in the market, the more expensive the electricity is going to be, and the more unreliable. And indeed, if that is going to be compounded by the closure of these baseload power plants, which is being forced. It's not. Nobody really wants to close them, or at least that's not the main aim. It's being forced by the fact that they're being forced to operate uncommercially at times when they, in a way that they were never designed to do so. And the problem is, if and you mentioned nuclear, if nuclear replaces them, that has the same issue.
Exactly.
France doesn't have that issue at the present time, because it doesn't have the same amount of renewables that we have. We've got record amounts, beaten only by Germany, I think. And really that makes our operation of our baseload power station, whether they're nuclear, gas or coal, far more problematic than for other countries. And it's actually led to a position where we were not very long ago, less than 10 years ago, just about the cheapest source of electricity in the world, and we're now among the most expensive.
We have made a right mess of it, Alan, and there's no way out of it obvious just yet. Thanks so much for joining us. That's Dr. Alan Moran there, who's a Principal of Regulation Economics, joining us live from Melbourne.